Hello to niggas and niggas only. This is your boy Keese, This American Negro, MarquiseDavon, whichever one you want to call me. And today I'm going to be talking about what my journey was as a creative, and more particularly, what did it mean for me to be a black creative. It wasn't an easy ride. So before we get into the rest of this episode, remember you can support me on my Patreon at patreon.com/MarquiseDavon. You can start as low as $2 a month, which is $24 a year, and make whatever commitment feels good to you. But just know you are also being able to support me in my larger productions that I have coming up, get more inside information about stuff that I'm doing, and kind of get like a fake me out little vlog situation going too. But you get to see a much more personal side of me on Patreon. So please look forward to seeing that. And it's also a one-stop shop to see where all of my content can also exist as it gets released throughout the week. So once again, MarquiseDavon, that's MarQuise. Make sure to go and become a patron. Thank you. Also, the shirt I'm wearing is from Stoop and Stank. So also feel free to head to Stoop and Stank. I'll make sure to put them in the description box below. This is my favorite pro-black shirt that I got, and it lets y'all know exactly what it is. So feel free to also go along and subscribe and follow and support another black business, Stoop and Stank. So I'll make sure to put that in the description box below. Now, I've been thinking more and more, like, I had to come to this realization, like, yo, Keese, you have a platform, bro. Like, and that joint's a little crazy to experience because at this point now, it's like, I'm now somebody who people go to regularly to look for opinions on things, to go out of their way for. And I had to think for a moment, like, when did I get to this point? Like, what was that point where shit just shifted? And I'm not sure what that was, but as I go back, I think there was a real pivotal moment, especially during the pandemic and what was leading up to that, where it wasn't just what was going on in my hometown anymore. It was really now me as a creative overall. So I'm gonna kind of go throughout that journey a little bit in terms of what that development was. And it really all started with the Dear Reading podcast. And so the Dear Reading podcast is my love letter to my hometown, Reading, Pennsylvania. And that podcast was made out of necessity. It was made out of frustration. I made that because people that I went to college with always said, oh, you're from Reading? How? You survived? How'd you do that? And to me, I'm just like, y'all ain't able to talk about my hometown. Y'all don't know nothing about it. But I also recognize that media wasn't doing a good service. And I went to school for broadcasting and video production. So I was really in the space of like, yo, media is doing my hometown dirty, and I want to be able to add nuance to this. I want to add to the reasons why this thing may be happening, rather than just going, oh, that is a trash hometown. We need to figure out what's going on because it's violent. But nobody was ever answering the question, like, how did it get there? And nobody was also highlighting the good things that were going on in the city as well. And we had so many great things going on in the city. So to me, I said the best thing is, I hit my boy John and was just like, yo, I want to do this thing. I want to do a podcast, and I think we should just get together and just talk about the city. Let's talk about the positive going on, but also let's be honest about our upbringing. And that's what we did. And it was dope because we had the first few episodes, and that was super interesting to go through that process because it was a very multicultural podcast to start with. And then John had this idea, and he was like, yo, what if we just shifted to like, what is the black experience like in this city? And that wasn't something that we got because my hometown's really 78% Latino and then 9% black, if that, whatever the stat is. And it was fascinating because we didn't even realize that even was a particular deficit. And I had a very particular black experience and found my own black community in college that was much more intentional. And so when I got home, I was like, yo, I want the same thing. What is that thing? Right? And so as I'm looking for that thing, John had that great idea to shift it to like, what does it mean for it to be very black focused and even further in like black American focused, because even then we were getting all these other stories. So our news was talking about like what we were personally going through and how we were developing this thing and building out our own media space, because we just wanted that independence to tell our stories in a way that they needed to be told, in a way that felt responsible, in a way that felt good. And we did that because 3 years later we became an NAACP award-winning podcast. So yes, we will pat ourselves on the back for that. But it was also the time that it took us to get there. And the entire time where it took us, we were sitting in a hot ass room, recording around an iPhone, and was just like, let's just talk and see what happens. But we knew that we wanted to do something with the interview portion. And in that interview portion, we wanted to highlight anybody from the city. We wanted to highlight the regular, every single day people that were doing cool shit, but also that were just living life and being able to be honest about their experience. And we got that every single week. They were just like, yes, I love this conversation around mental health. That was the very first episode. And that we talked about was like our upbringing and what is this mental health component that we need to talk about that's going on in our city. Because I had so much access to those conversations that I'd never heard them have in my hometown. And that's when I started to realize, like, oh shit, like this is something that people are looking towards even more, because that's the conversation people wanted to have and never had the avenue to have it. And it was that moment right there where I said, yes, let's do this thing. Let's lean into this a little bit more. And let's start to build out this space that is truly a deficit in my hometown. And so to me, as I became a content creator and became somebody who spoke on different situations and was able to lean into these conversations because I had the capacity to learn. Well, not learn, but I learned this and was just like, yo, how come everybody don't got this? I just wanted to give back in a way that felt authentic, in a way that was easier to ease into and bring people along for those conversations. And that was so important to me as a creative. And it was how I kind of focused on like any other pieces of content that I would make. It's how I would start to focus on, like, if I'm going to make a podcast, how am I going to make this podcast something that just goes beyond recording just for recording's sake? Because honestly, that's where all the other podcasts go to shit. They go into recording and don't actually have a purpose. And I think there's a space where it lives, but I don't think that they're sustainable because there's still no true purpose to go beyond that. Like, why is this podcast bigger than yourself? And to me, that's always been my thing around creating any platform is like, how am I creating something that goes beyond just me? And so as I think about that, as I became a content creator more and more and started to get comfortable with calling myself one, because in my mind, I'm just like, I'm just doing a podcast, like, woo, woo, woo. And even as the content creator and creative started to be in like this weird interchangeable space, I was like, but am I doing anything really creative though? And so I was just like, what name do I get to subscribe myself to? And it feels good. So I was just a podcaster to start with, but I started leaning into more creative when I decided to expand my horizons a little bit more too. And as I'm becoming this content creator who created a very local specific podcast, it even extended out to now people are just like, yeah, but Marquise, we want to know how you got to that. We want to know your full line of thinking and just you, which is when I birthed This American Negro. This American Negro was an opportunity where I was like, yes, I want to be very intentional about bridging academia and the hood. I want to make sure these worlds are together because I have the ability to communicate very dense information. I have the ability to communicate very complex ideas in a way that invites every single person. Like, that's that's a lot of my big mission, and I wanted more people to be able to have access in that kind of way. So as I'm in this podcasting world, I'm like getting ready to move to Philly, and I'm just like, cool, I did this thing. Now, what does it mean for me to now move? And because I felt like I hit a ceiling. And as a creative, sometimes that sucks because I never wanted to be in a space where I can now just move in autopilot and no longer present and no longer pushing and no longer, I got comfortable and I was getting bored in that comfort. And as more people believed in what we were doing and found it to be a necessity, I was just like, this is not my ceiling. There is more to me, and I want to be able to play in the big leagues. I never thought small. Like, Dear Reading was definitely a jump-off point, and I never take that platform for granted because that's the platform that propelled me into having the confidence to do This American Negro, to extend into Rational Anger, to be able to start delving into video, to create my own short film, to do all of these things. Because those are my core audience members. Those are people who were like, no, you're making your immediate impact here and you're staying here. And it was always that tension. Black people feel it. Growing up in poor neighborhoods, you feel it. is like this was never my stopping point. And I battled with that because as a Black creative, I also felt like, and this is how I'm incorporating the Black part into it, there's this obligation to community that I never want to lose, because I never want a community to say, no, he used us to gain here and now he went here. And I don't think it's ever come off that way. And if it has, like, it hasn't been communicated to me yet, but it's something I think about very often, of just like, damn, what does it mean to potentially have to leave this platform behind in order for me to grow in a different space? You know? And that was so interesting to have to navigate, because there then became that time where, as I navigated that space, it was also like, yo, it could also it could also blow up in your face, you know? And also, don't be that bougie nigga. Oh, don't think that just because you got on now that you can't show up here, X, Y, and Z. And those are things I always like battled with too, you know? Like, I really wanted to make sure, like, am I creating this content that is important? Am I also still serving the community that helps me get to where I am at? And what does it look like for me to challenge myself? And that's when I realized, like, my people were paying attention to a space. People were paying attention to Reading, Pennsylvania because of the podcast and me. And it was content that they can still relate to, because at the end of the day, we're still talking about Black culture. We're still talking about what that means to us, but we're also talking about very localized specific issues. And we were doing this for such a long time, and it felt like people banged with us. They really enjoyed our conversation, and overall, they felt like, yes. And then there became a point in the pandemic where I feel like we shifted. And it was that shift into us really focusing on, well, a lot of people looked at us different. We were no longer just the cultural commentary stuff. We were also the social justice people. We were also the abolitionists. We were also the protesters. We were also the agitators. We were also calling people out. We're doing these things. And it's so dope to have that space where we're doing all of these things. But there was almost a space where they pigeonholed us. There was an injustice, dear Reading. There's an injustice, where's Marquise? There's an injustice, what is your opinion on this? And it starts to limit you as a Black creative who does social justice work, but they don't allow you to navigate all these other spaces. Like, that was a question I had to myself the entire time, was like, yes, as somebody whose content is really focused on centering Blackness and Black people's liberation, does that mean I get to enjoy the other stuff? Like, if I start creating content that did not specifically always address an inequity, will people still bang with me? And that, I feel like, is a struggle of a lot of Black creatives who do the work that we do the work that I do, that's very intentional around, like, disrupting systems, dismantling systems, and pushing people to think in a way that makes the world a better place. Because in that too, as I started to build up my platform, and I had to start recognizing, like, oh shit, people are listening to me, they're retweeting me, they're looking for me to do these things. I had to fully step into that. And I was nervous because in that I was just like, well, am I saying all the right things? Am I as well read as some of these other platforms? Why are they coming to me when they can go here? Because I'm learning from 50 million different people. I'm consistently reading. I'm consistently ingesting content. I'm consistently learning and pushing myself. And now I'm one of the people that people are going to do this. And I said, fuck, I can't mess up. I can't mess up. And so I added on so much more pressure to me, because I did not want to disappoint my community. And I didn't also want to, like, essentially, like, look like I'm an imposter. I'm trying to come up off of this social justice kind of space, because that's the world that we were leaning into more and more. That's what the regular content was. Everybody and their moms was Black-splaining, and you heard feminism here and womanism here and Black liberation here and woke here and this here. And I said, damn, these Jones are preachy. Is there a moment where I became preachy? And yes, there were some pieces where I look back and I'm just like, nigga, shut up. And then there are other times where I'm just like, but that was somebody's first access point to this conversation. And sometimes I feel like we forget that part of making this content is also the access point to conversation for different people. And then when you take it a step further, as creatives, we want to make money. We want to make sure that as we are making this money, how are we doing it in an ethical way? And that's not every creative's thing, right? That doesn't have to be. But for me, I always had that contention because I said, y'all know I don't bang with capitalism like that. And I think I should be paid what I'm worth. And I also enjoy making this stuff because that's the experience that we have. So I remember reckoning with even having one of the first events. And so for me, I recognized like, cool, like even some of my abolition friends like said, no, Marquise, you got to be getting paid. Like you're bugging, bro. Like what are you doing, right? And so for me, I had to find that balance and that sweet spot, and I just love it because I really started to focus on like what does it mean to throw an event and they have to pay for the experience, but the knowledge that can be anywhere, but you just get a very unique experience. And while you're also contributing to us monetarily and supporting us in that fashion, how are we also giving back? And so damn near every single event, there was some type of knowledge exchange that we were able to give, or you were assisting our community in very different ways, whether that goes into supporting a local brand, whether that's like, hey, let me help you with some social media consultations here, or hey, let me actually do you want more recognition, or would you like to use our platform? How can I just give back? Because just taking people's money as I'm trying to do knowledge sharing just felt to me. Like I still struggle with it today of just like, what is that balance of paying for this thing and knowing that this information should be free because we need the world to be a better place and for everybody to get their shit together. That was my conundrum as a Black creative going into that. And then there's the other piece of it of just like becoming somebody who has a platform and that looming anxiety of cancel culture. And I don't think it exists. But in the height of it, it all makes you think of just like, yo, I am doing this thing and I want to continue to do this thing. But if I fuck up on any pieces of my content, how do I come back from that? And as I have to navigate coming back from that, what does that mean for the work that I put out moving forward? Whether that's something I might have messed up on in social media, or if it's something I may have said, or it was an interaction that I had that got into the public imagination, whatever these things are, like how does that start to surface for different people? And as much as I didn't want it to affect me, it was definitely like that anxiousness. And I think this idea of cancel culture added to imposter syndrome for me. It was just like, fuck, am I gonna be found out? Like, am I? Is someone gonna be like, yeah, none of that video was right. None of this is right. And I know as a teacher, like, yeah, it's okay for us not to have the right answer all the time and for us to make mistakes because that's the point of what we do. And I think there's also part of it where I'm just like, bro, like, if I mess up one time, that's ruining my entire platform. And they're going to be like, yeah, you some nigga who don't even got his stuff right, but he trying to preach to us about blah, 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 blah. And I was just like, ugh. So I think sometimes it's really hard, like, as a creative, you never know where you're going to go. You never know how people are going to receive you. You never know, like, how your platform will be received as you move forward. Because now I had to understand that it took 3 years of consistency, 3 years of trial and error, 3 years of consistently having my one space of the podcasting, and people were just like, yeah, you're doing the podcasting, you're the podcast guy. And I was like, fuck, I don't want to be stuck in that hole. And so what I said, I'm gonna make a short film because I got skills. I have a vision and I know how to execute it. It's just a matter of doing it, right? And then it felt like people were noticing me in a much different way. They knew the activist Marquise. They knew the educator Marquise. They knew the thinker. But they didn't know the director. They didn't know me being able to put together this team. They didn't know the music lover. They didn't know the TV and film lover. They didn't know a lot of this. So I found myself, as I took my break, I wanted to indulge in fun. I want to indulge in the other aspects of me because I didn't only want to make one particular kind of content. Now that lives in a Rational Anger podcast, but I have so much fun with the This Is We podcast. And I have so much fun doing this video stuff. And to me, that's the exciting balance of becoming a creative who wants to start to expand their fields. And I found inspiration from people like Jackie Aina. Like, sis really was just like, yeah, cool, I got you on that makeup tip, but I also really like this luxury lifestyle, so I also want to share that. Um, for Harriet, Kimberly and Foster, like, was making content that just was like, yes, I guess I'm a bomb ass interviewer, but also let's get into my theater bag. Let's get into music. Let's get into pop culture. Let's get into Janet. Like, I love her so much, but she also Chloe and Halle Stan, and man, look, but those are fun content creators. I think of people like Kosi, who was in the um, podcasting space, but he was also had this love. He's a visual artist, y'all, and I hope you get into his work because he is somebody who is so exciting to watch because he's so intentional and is passionate, and everything he puts out. I have yet to be just like, all right, that was cool. Like, there's so much intention, there's so much story, and that's exciting to me as a creative, and you get to navigate that space so much more all the time. And it made me want to do that. It made me want to experience, like, who am I as a visual artist when I start putting together more of these long form visual pieces? Who am I as the person who can make podcasting a different experience? Who am I as a YouTuber? Who am I making micro content? Like, it's so much fun, but it's also just daunting because now it's just like, as I make this content, it's always been that tension of like, where do you want to pull yourself? Because people always expect one thing out of you because that's comfortable, it's familiar. But when they're able to see so many different facets of you, that's the part that I want to get into and make it so much more normalized for creatives to do that, because I feel like we get put into like becoming a one-trick pony. And I see it more for Black creatives because people expect us to always be excellent. But I am so excited to see where I mess up in the podcasting space, where I mess up in the YouTube space, taking a risk that might not make sense to other people, but it makes sense to me. Yeah, all of that. So I say all that to say because being a creative and intersecting it with your Blackness is so much more difficult to experience, but I'm working on that, and I'm excited to see where it goes. And I'm having so much more fun making content again. So, yeah, I hope something within here resonated with you. Tell me your journey of the intersections of being a creative and being Black and what that means. There's definitely so much I didn't even touch on, to be honest. Like, look out for the warm up as I talk about more of the space of becoming a Black creative and like the little things that I've learned in that space, because that's the space where I want to talk to other creatives about their journey. I want to talk about building a pitch deck and throwing an event and curating an experience and building a podcast and me as a capable leader or incapable leader. Like, those are the things I want to talk about in that space. For this, it's definitely going to be much more like personal journey and experience and larger ideas and something that may stand out to me, but I really wanted to just have this conversation. So once again, thank you all for coming back for another episode of This American Negro. This is your host, MarquiseDavon, whatever you want to call me. Feel free to follow me on all social media, and just thank you. So, peace.